New Mexico is a land of stories, myths, and legends. The unexplained and the unexplored. I'm Chad Brummett, and we are exploring the unique and unusual world of New Mexico Strange. Hello, and thank you for joining us on this episode of New Mexico Strange. I'm Chad Brummett, and today's topic is something that I think a lot of New Mexicans know about. They at least know the name Billy the Kid. It is one of the big things, I think, globally that people know of New Mexico. They probably know Roswell. They may know, the Manhattan Project, Trinity, and Billy the Kid, worldwide. With that, there's a lot of myths. There's a lot of tall tales that came from the Wild West. And sometimes trying to pick fact and fiction apart is kind of difficult. So we are enlisting the expertise and knowledge of our state historian, Rob Martinez. Rob, thanks for joining us today. Happy to have you back here.
Thank you for having me again. It's good to be here.
Yeah. All right. So let's just start off with what we know about Billy the Kid in terms of, before we get into the legends of how many men he killed and did he actually, die by the hand of Pat Garrett in 1881? What do we know happened with Billy the Kid or William H. Bonney if we want to, get real particular?
Well, what we don't know about Billy the Kid probably outweighs what we know.
Okay. That's a fair way to put it.
As state historian, I deal with so many inquiries about all the things you just mentioned and many, many more. But Billy the Kid tops them all.
Really?
Oh, I get inundated. So, Billy the Kid, what do we know about him? Henry McCarty, William Bonney, Billy the Kid. We really don't know. I mean, we have an idea when he was born, supposedly in New York, but maybe not. Of Irish Catholic background, probably, but we don't know. He had a little brother. He was born, again, supposedly in 1859, but we don't have a record of it. His brother was born about 3 or 4 years later. And the family, like a lot of families back then, struggled. Dad was dead at an early age for the boys. And mom remarried. She remarried, and then they moved west. And the mom and stepdad married in Santa Fe at a Presbyterian church when Henry was about 15 and his little brother's about 11. And they were witnesses at the wedding. After that, shortly after that, their stepfather abandoned them.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
So he and his brother were orphaned. He started a life of crime quite early on, stealing, drinking. Then he and another guy robbed a Chinese launderer, and then they ended up running away. He escaped to Arizona, where he killed a blacksmith. And by about 1877, he starts calling himself William Bonney.
Okay.
Who knows?
We don't know why.
We don't know why. It's a mystery. That's what's fascinating about him. There's so much mystery. And he comes back, and he happens to be at the right place at the wrong time, you could say, when there's range wars going on in New Mexico. See, Billy the Kid, he's kind of a metaphor or a symbol of that period, but there's a lot going on. There's the Santa Fe Ring. These are lawyers who are manipulating the local system to take land away from the Mexican people who had deep roots here and had land roots, land grants going back to the Mexican period, deep into the Spanish period, the colonial period. But the Americans start to come in the early to mid 1800s, and they bring a different legal system on how to deal with land. They bring barbed wire, something we had never seen before. So there's resistance at San Miguel County, the Gorras Blancas. These are Hispanic Mexican men who cut barbed wire, and they destroy railroad tracks. And their resistance movement, to, again, depending on what side you're on, to the Americans, they were terrorists. To the Hispanic Mexican people of New Mexico, they were heroes. Well, Billy the Kid joins a man named Tunstall from Britain, an English guy, who has some friction in Lincoln County with a man named Dolan, an Irishman. Gee, you know, put a British guy and an Irish guy in the middle of New Mexico, there can't be any problems, right? What could happen?
Right.
Well, there's economic and political friction there, and ultimately Tunstall is killed. Billy the Kid joins his gang, the Regulators, and this leads to more violence for William Bonney. These stories about him, these myths, have been overblown through the decades, through even centuries now. I've heard people say, he killed 20 men. He killed 30. He killed 50. When all is said and done, he killed about 9.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
4 him directly, and 5 in shootouts.
Okay.
Where maybe it was him killing the people.
Maybe it was his bullet
Maybe
that hit
it
the
was
guy.
his, maybe not.
Gotcha.
We don't know. So this leads to these tensions. He ends up killing a sheriff, Brady, and this leads to the governor at the time, Lew Wallace, wanting him. He puts out a $500 reward for anyone who could bring William Bonney, by then known as Billy the Kid, to justice, dead or alive. All right? So these myths are just building up, building up. The myth makers, to a great extent, are the newspapers. He starts to show up in the newspapers in Las Vegas, in Santa Fe, and even in New York.
Really?
New York City. Oh, yeah.
Going that far.
Oh, yeah. I think he feeds this desire people have for anti-heroes, you know, and the great West, the open deserts and mountains, and people doing whatever they want, you know. And so I think that's where we start to see these stories start to build up. Well, we know that he's ultimately captured and he's taken to Las Vegas, and people, there's crowds. He's almost like O.J. Simpson, you know, there's
Right.
these big crowds wanting
That was
to see
the trial of the century back in the 1880s.
This guy who's really he's kind of a low-level criminal. And so they take him. Then they escort him to Santa Fe, where he supposedly says, if I had my gun, I could take care of all of you. And he's interviewed by a newspaper man about his situation where, you know, they're probably going to execute him. He goes, you can't let things get you down. I'm paraphrasing, okay?
Sure. Okay.
You can't let things get you down. He goes, this is just my time, my luck. This is my bad luck. Then they take him down to be put on trial at Mesilla. And there, of course, it's totally fabricated. The judge said, you're going to hang till you're dead, dead, dead. And supposedly, it didn't happen. Billy the Kid told him, you go to hell, hell, hell. Well, that's literature right there.
Sure.
The truer story or history is that he didn't say anything. So they obviously take him after that to Lincoln, where he's holed up. He ends up escaping, killing 2 deputies. And ultimately, Pat Garrett, the sheriff, hunts him down to a house where he's hiding out. And he shoots him. 2 shots. One misses him, one hits him. And he we don't know if he died right away or if it took him a while. He lingered. But that's 1881. And that's the history.
Okay.
Now, there's a lot of myths in there, right?
There are a lot of myths surrounding Billy the Kid.
So you tell me some of the myths.
So what I think getting back to the number of people that he killed, and to me it's always struck me as this thing that there's just more of a romanticism by saying he killed a man for every year that he was alive, right? That 20, 21. And it's always struck me as something that it's like that's too poetic to be real. That's something Hollywood comes up with, or that's something that, you know, a really good sort of dime store novelist would come up with. So it could have been. We only know that it was 9. Is there a possibility that there were a number of other murders that he was responsible for that we don't know?
There's always the possibility.
Okay.
You know, as a historian, I deal with facts to the best of my ability, meaning what can I find in a document or a newspaper report or, you know, later in life, you know, TV reports, right?
Sure.
But, you know, we don't know. It's like anybody's life. I don't care if you're looking at Queen Isabel of Spain or George Washington or Hernan Cortez, the conquistador of Mexico, or Popeye, who led the Pueblo Revolt.
Right.
We can't possibly know everything about their life or everything they did. You know, everybody had secrets.
Sure.
And, you know, maybe actions or events that might come to light later on. As a historian, I always say I'm willing to change my mind when evidence is presented to me. And a professor taught me that at UNM many years ago. So there's always that. But right now, all we have are the facts that are in the documents. And it seems to be 9.
Right.
But there's always the possibility. There's always the chance that he killed more. But those myths that he possibly wasn't killed in 1881.
That's the other big one. That's the other big one. And, you know, I mean, I know that was even the basis for the sequel of Young Guns, you know, is that this man telling the story is actually Billy the Kid, that he went on to become Bushy Bill Roberts and lived in Texas and lived until his 80s. Do you think there is any I mean, again, is there any evidence that points to that? Is there any evidence that points to the fact that Bushy Bill Roberts was Billy the Kid, or any evidence that he didn't die at Fort Sumner in 1881?
From what I have read, which is not a lot, to be honest, what I've read is no. There is no hard evidence. I mean, I think when it comes to someone like Billy the Kid or any legend, we don't want them to die.
Yeah.
We want Elvis to still be alive.
Right.
We want Andy Kaufman to still be alive. And we hear stories. I heard that Andy Kaufman was still alive and living in Albuquerque.
Really?
Oh, yeah. That's one of the stories.
Can we get him on the show, Fernando? Can we?
That would be cool. And, you know, so I think that's what it is. I mean, we want that to have been the case because it just adds to it. You know, we love the mystery of it all. And I get it. I do a lot of research for New Mexico history, but I do a lot of genealogy, researching family history, my own and other people's. And I've done a lot of mine back through Mexico, even some lines going back to Spain into the 1600s and 1500s. But some of my lines stop in the 1800s or the 1700s. And I would love to find out who they were, but I kind of like having the mystery.
Yeah.
I kind of like not knowing, because guess what? Then I can kind of fill in the blanks. Odds are they're run-of-the-mill, normal, regular Mexican New Mexicans, which is fine, which is fine. But maybe one of them was a German merchant.
Right.
Maybe one of them was a black cowboy who came up from Mexico through Texas and into my family line. You always want to know more, but you also want to fill in the blanks. And that's great, but it can also be problematic
Sure.
when we start filling in the blanks with things we want, like with genealogy, family histories, or history. For example, all of us seem to want to know about our royal noble ancestors, not so much about our poor, average immigrant ancestors who just were hardworking, good people.
Right.
Or chicken thieves.
Right.
Cattle rustlers. We're
Right.
not so interested in that. But I am. I want to know the truth.
Yeah.
Like John Lennon said, give me some truth.
Yeah.
You know, I want to know the truth about Billy the Kid. And the truth sometimes doesn't add up to that amazing of a cowboy outlaw.
Yeah. And sometimes it just straight out refutes it. It just says, nope, that's
Exactly.
not what it was. Yeah.
Exactly. He was just what a lot of young people are. He was about 15 and abandoned, and he had a rough family life. A lot of people did back then. He made it into the newspapers. That's really what made Billy the Kid. I mean, he was a gunman. He was a gambler, a drinker. He shot a few people. To your question earlier, I wonder how many other men were like him who didn't make it into the newspaper.
Well, even just thinking about, as you said, that he had joined John Tunstall's gang, the Regulators. I mean, obviously, films like Young Guns, you got to fill it out in the 80s with the 80s stars. You got to have your Charlie Sheens and your Dermot Mulrooney's and your Kiefer Sutherlands and Lou Diamond Phillips. But they didn't make that movie about Doc or about Chavez. They made it about Billy the Kid.
Yeah, he's the star.
That's the guy that hooks us.
He made it. He made it big.
So, and you're saying partly because of the newspapers, and back in the day, the ideas of these aggrandized stories, and they needed to sell the paper, so maybe just
the media darling. He was a media darling.
That's a great way to put it.
I mean, we look at people now. You see people doing some of the most horrible things, but they get all the headlines.
Yeah.
Whenever I open the paper, but. This person's not being condemned; they're being turned into a hero.
Right.
Or
even if it's a thing that it's not necessary, it's not an outright condemnation. They hold that back, but we're just interested in that. I mean, and we see it today in journalism. If it bleeds, it leads. Right.
Exactly.
That still exists, and it was still. You're saying it was really kind of the thing in 1881, 1878, all of those times.
Definitely.
We obviously, we have tall tales. I think of our beautiful St. James Hotel in Cimarron, New Mexico. When you go there and, they talk about the fact that Jesse James stayed there and Annie Oakley and Wild Bill and, all these different folks. But Billy the Kid really, he does seem to be an enigma of sorts. Why do you think that his mystery persists? Obviously, I can understand back in the 19th century why people were fascinated. But, I mean, for goodness sakes, we just had a green light for Young Guns 3. In 2025, we're still talking about this. Why do you think he's got such staying power?
I think it's an American thing.
Okay.
I think it's an American thing. I mean, don't get me wrong. Spain has their folk heroes. El Cid from medieval times. He's like the defining Spanish knight, caballero, man on horseback. A complex, complicated person. Other nations and peoples have this, but in our country, the United States, we're fascinated by the past, that mythological past. It sometimes concerns me that we don't seem to be that interested in real history.
Right.
But we are interested in myths and legends. And there's just something about the West where we live. There's something about the cowboy, the lone cowboy on a horse looking out over a desert where there's unlimited potential, where anything can happen. Good things, but also bad things. And I think there's just something in us that yearns for that aches for that. And I think people like Wyatt Earp, Billy the Kid, they touch something in us. It's kind of primordial, except it's not that far back. But we're not that old of a country.
Right.
We're only 200 some years old. Right. So it's we don't have to go back that far to find these anti-heroes or people we want to relate to. Look at this guy who recently shot that health
Luigi Mangione
guy in the back of the head. It's a horrifying thing he did, yet he's become a celebrity.
Right. There are some people that do look at him as this kind of Robin Hood kind of figure, and obviously he was acting in a very different way, but it was a similar thing with Billy the Kid, that some people kind of saw him as this Robin Hood. And, talking about the idea of a lone cowboy, kind of looking at that really is kind of a metaphor for America, right? This idea of things be good, bad, it's the choices we make, but there is this horizon of opportunity in front of us. Could be negative, could be positive opportunity, but it's that lone cowboys to discover.
Yeah.
Right?
And we need to be careful, though, because if we strip away the mythology, the legend, he was not a good person.
Right.
There's really nothing in him to emulate. I don't know that again, we don't know everything about his life, but what we do know, there's not much good there. And so we have to be careful that we don't start making those aspects, those characteristics, things to aspire to.
Right.
There are plenty of people in our history who we can look up to who were imperfect, whether it's people like Padre Martinez of Taos or Nina Otero Warren, people who were interested in education for everyone,
right?
And helping the poor and helping the downtrodden. I'd like to think we can elevate those people and aspire to be like them.
Yeah. Well, even looking back, and I know we got to wrap here, but even looking back at Lew Wallace himself, he authored Ben-Hur.
Yeah.
Obviously that went on and it was a huge thing, but when, I don't know that I have ever, and I am a native New Mexican, grew up, born and raised, I don't know if I have ever had someone said, oh, you're from New Mexico. Yeah, your governor wrote Ben-Hur. No, you're from New Mexico. Billy the Kid country. The Kid. He's the guy that grabbed the headlines.
And now in modern times, it's funny. Now it's Breaking Bad.
Yes.
Which I love.
Another anti-hero.
But I love it. But a funny story, we were, my wife and I, we were in France, and we were in Florence, and we went to this medieval monastery that had recipes for soaps and perfumes from medieval times.
Really? Okay.
And we bought a few things, and we went to the counter to purchase them, and they ask us in their French accent, I see your passport, and where are you from? And we go, Albuquerque, New Mexico. And she goes, Breaking Bad. And we're like, wow.
Yeah.
They didn't say red and green chili.
Right.
Or
Something
balloon
else.
fiesta.
Exactly.
We're famous for these things. But, there's something about that resonates. Great storytelling. I think that's what it is. You know, we love a great story, and who doesn't?
Right.
And that's a great story. I just when I do research on a lot of these people in New Mexico, I'm like, this would be a great movie.
Right.
Not just Billy the Kid, but all the people I mentioned before.
Yeah.
Everyone would be a really great movie.
Yeah. There we go. We got to get Hollywood on the phone, not just shoot here, but tell stories of here. Rob, thank you so much for your time today. This has been a fascinating conversation.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And thank you for joining us again, folks. If you want more information on New Mexico Strange, other episodes, make sure that you download the KRQE Now app on your Apple TV, your Roku, your Fire Stick. You can also catch us online at krqe.com. Until next time, I'm Chad Brummett. This has been New Mexico Strange.